Hey, everybody, and welcome to Minister's Toolbox. I'm glad that you could join us today, and I appreciate that you're spending just a few moments to sharpen your skills for ministry. Today, I'm featuring an interview with Greg Holder. He is a pastor, author, speaker, and storyteller, passionate about the local church and how God designed us to live and thrive in healthy communities. He's the lead pastor of The Crossing and also the author of Never Settle and The Genius of One. So, in a moment, the interview will start. Back in a moment. Greg, welcome to our show.
Well, thank you for having me. What a privilege it is. We were just catching up off air about just what the work God's doing around the world, even now in the context of everything. And, well, it's just such a good reminder. He's still up to something. And so thanks for having me.
Yeah, and it's also something that happened offline, too, is both of us share a real commitment to Zimbabwe. Ironically enough, we're both very connected to that country.
Yeah.
Greg for quite a bit longer, but pretty cool stuff. Who'da thunk it to Americans that are focused on a country that's probably one of the poorest countries in the world.
Yeah. How about that?
Well, Greg, share with us just briefly how you came to faith and how that translated into what you're doing today.
Sure. Well, I was blessed to have a mom and dad who followed Jesus and who began to teach me of faith early on. And I came to my own understanding of who Jesus is and wants to be in my life at a fairly early age. Of course, I continue to have this journey along the way, understanding more and more of what that decision and that turning to Him made. But I'm just so grateful that my mom and dad were open with their faith. My dad is the one who taught me how to read the Bible. He's no longer with us. He's gone to be with the Lord about 3-4 years ago, and so he taught me how to read the Bible. And I would ask him questions. I remember as a kid, I'd ask him questions. Well, what does this mean? And I didn't realize it at the time, but he was kind of teaching me in a rabbinical way because he would answer a question with a question. I would say, well, what does this mean? And he'd say, well, what do you think it means? I don't know, Dad. That's why I'm coming to you. And he would constantly turn me back to the Word. And it just began to give me this sense that the scriptures are up to the challenge of my questions, and they're up to the struggles that I have. And I'm forever grateful for that. I would say, along with that, for whatever reason, when I was growing up, did not seem to be in what you might call a healthy church culture. A lot of conflict. There's a lot of emphasis on changing the world, telling people about Jesus. But inside the church, there was a lot of infighting. And I mean, at an early age, I began to sense that. I remember one night driving home from church, and my mom, in tears, looked at my dad and said, how can Christians treat each other this way? And as a little boy, I began to kind of write church off. Now, I don't mean that I ever left the church. I don't have some big sordid chapter of my life, but I began to wonder if God really, this is a little boy thinking, God, do you know what's going on inside your church? Now, the reason I tell you that is long story is that God called me out of the marketplace into ministry a little over 20 years ago. And I'm just grateful that He has done this, and so grateful for the way He has.
What were you doing in the marketplace?
Well, my background is in counseling and psychology. And so I was working I had been in private practice, but then I was overseeing inpatient and outpatient clinics for New Life Clinics, a Christian organization. And so felt like it was, okay, God, this is what you're calling me to do. But looking back, He was constantly preparing me to be a pastor. Okay, so when I get into this role, one of the things that just became apparent to me that I couldn't get away from it is, God, may we now do this differently than the way I felt it and saw it and experienced church culture when I was growing up. I'm just so grateful. And there were so many different stories where God proved me wrong in this way. It was like even early on being called into the ministry, it was God was telling me that He hadn't given up on His church, and there were wonderful, beautiful stories happening in the local church, and I fell back in love with the church. I really did. 25 years ago, I fell back in love with what God was doing in a local body of believers. And from that
You say
point
you fell
on,
back in love. Was that directly through a particular local expression of that, or simply through the scriptures?
Both. It was both. It was studying the scriptures, and it was seeing those scriptures lived out. It was seeing those scriptures being more than theoretical constructs. They were being, incarnational is a word that gets used a lot, but it was flesh and blood, tangible, physical representations of, oh, so this is what it's like to love as we have been loved. This is what it's like to forgive and to encourage and to do this, not perfectly and not with perfect people. And our church is still not perfect, of course. But I learned from some people all those years ago that God really knows what he's doing. I know that sounds strange to say, but as a little boy, I was beginning to wonder. And then throughout my young adult years, God just kept teaching me and wooing me and calling me back into his work. And so one of the primary things that we said coming back in was to this, Robin and I, my wife and I, actually stepping into ministry, was, let's be a church that lives out what Jesus says in his word. Like, for instance, in John 17, worst night of his life, Jesus is being, he's already dismissed Judas from the table. They're making their way to the Garden of Gethsemane. This is the night he's betrayed. But he takes time to pray for us. He prays for himself, he prays for his disciples, but then he prays for those who would believe because of the message of those disciples. Well, as best I can tell, that's us. Mm-hmm. And what does he pray? He doesn't pray that we'd be the coolest kids on the block. He doesn't pray that we'd have the most money or the most friends or the most influence. He doesn't pray that we'd win all the debates. He prays, Father, may they be one as you and I are one, so that the world will know that you sent me. So there it is. Mission is right there. We are to tell the world who Jesus is. But one of the ways that the world will pay attention to this, one of the ways we have credibility, is by how we love and serve and experience real unity together.
One of the challenges I have, I share an experience being in a church for 15 years.
Yeah.
When I met the Lord at 17, I became a part of a church that started well and ended really badly. I wrote about it in a book called Spiritual Abuse. And that gives you an idea of how badly it got.
Right.
But to your point, you can come out of those experiences thinking that, it's really not worth it. And so many people who've gone through those experiences either sit in the back pew or they just don't become a part of a church at all because they just figured, I paid my dues, right, and don't want to be part of this. But
right,
the thing that I came to a knowledge of and understanding of, even as a pastor, is at that time is, the thing that Jesus loves more than anything else is his church, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. And it's not like walk back into a spiritual abusive situation. But at the end of the day, the only thing that matters to him is really the church.
Right. Well, and it's through the church that his kingdom is advanced in this world, and we are, in fact, the plan. He entrusted it to us, and so absolutely, that's it. And if we don't take that seriously, then I would say we don't have a lot of credibility with our friends. If we don't treat each other differently than what my friends who don't know Jesus, if we don't treat each other differently than what they're seeing in the world, my lost friends are saying, well, why would I come join you and do what you're doing that sounds just like the world? And that's a very convicting thought. But what we're finding is there really is a winsomeness when my friends who don't know Jesus yet see the way that people can love and serve and treat each other. And there's that prayer from John 17. There's a oneness that we begin to reflect, and the prayer of Jesus is answered.
Well, so many too, and one of the things, because our audience is mostly pastors, a lot of them are faced with the dynamic of really either trying to introduce or change the culture of their church. Mm-hmm. Many churches have become very almost consumerized in the sense of the only reason that they're there is to preach a message, and that's no longer valuable because you can get that on YouTube. The dynamic of creating a culture, are there some suggestions or ideas that you would have in terms of either changing the culture or introducing a more Christ-like culture into a local church?
Yeah, this is something that we do all the time. It's a little bit of what we were talking about with Zimbabwe. We around the world and around the country are really helping people to seek out a godly culture within their church. And so the first thing is that you have to be intentional about it. These things don't happen by accident. To say, hey, we just look at that. We treat each other differently now. No. And I would say even for a church like ours that has focused and emphasized this for so many years, you still have to be intentional about that, because, and let's just take the last 18, 19 months as an example, that there's such a fractious nature to our world that if we're not careful, we're going to take on these things. When Paul says, do not be squeezed or into the mold of the world, it becomes very easy for us to do this when everything around us is so loud. So intentional is one word. For us, it takes the form of certainly teaching, but it also takes the form of how we put all of this in the framework of discipleship. There's a book that I wrote called Genius of One that has helped a bunch of people to just go, oh, so this is what the prayer of Jesus meant. This is how you do it. So you end up talking about things like humility and what does it mean to forgive and what are healthy boundaries and how do you collaborate? What's the difference between collaborating and just, playing in the ball pit at McDonald's? Because collaborating isn't just hanging out together. What does it mean for us to acknowledge each other's gifts and to do our part of the work? What does it mean to work alongside other churches? One of the things we're trying to do is to take this, it isn't just inside our church. It's how do other churches in our community here in St. Louis, how do we work together? How do we cheer and encourage and serve other churches instead of buying into that zero-sum game mentality that we all are susceptible to?
Mm-hmm. How do you go about doing that in a community where you're working with other churches? How do you make that happen, especially with other pastors that are suspicious of working with anybody?
Well, I'll go back to the same word, intentional. We have to be intentional, and you have to do. One of the things one of our pastors says is, let's do the right thing for a long time. So I don't go into this. We don't go into this saying, well, let's just call a prayer meeting together and we'll get 10, 15, 20 pastors together. First of all, it's a long shot to get 15 or 20 pastors together for a prayer meeting. It just is. For us, what we're finding is if we can agree on something out there, something that we're doing together that we can partner on together. So we're locking arms, and it isn't about my church. It isn't about your church. It's something that we'll do together. Now we're beginning to move forward in the community. And now we're beginning to say, well, let's do that. And it is a way to contend as one, as Paul would say to the Philippians. It's a way for us to lock arms and do this together as one. So that's one way. And then there are conscious, intentional moments where we're building relationships with pastors, reaching out all the time. Sometimes it works beautifully, sometimes not at all. And so I don't want to give you the impression we've cracked the code and we've got this figured out. But that word intentional is a part of it. And a lot of this comes down to us taking the risk of being vulnerable enough to say, I can't do this on my own. It's essential to our survival. I've lost count of the pastors I've spoken with this past year, either in person, Zoom calls, texts, at meetings, who have not only said, I'm tired, I'm fatigued, I'm worn out, but are saying, I think I'm going to hit the off-ramp earlier than I thought I would. I still love God. I still love his church. I still love the kingdom, but I can't do this anymore. So first of all, I understand that. But second of all, I'm inviting, calling pastors together to say, can we lock arms? Can we encourage each other? Can we say, hey, you're not crazy for caring that much. You're not crazy for hurting that much. Can I walk with you in this? Because I find so many pastors truly feel like they're stranded on an island. Yep. And it's one of those things where we together have to intentionally say, how are we going to do that? And as soon as I'm saying that to you, I can only imagine that some of your listeners, watchers, our viewers are saying, that just sounds too idealistic. It sounds, Greg, that's too naive. And I'm saying straight up, I know this is difficult and that I don't get it right all of the time, but I'm saying it's worth it. It is worth it. The kingdom is too important, and this world is too broken for us not. The gospel is too good of a news to share for us to not do this together.
That's it. The reason that I even started this podcast 5 years ago was with that in mind. Is there's a lot of podcasts out there. How to grow your church from 1 to 5,000 and 3 easy lessons and all that kind of thing. And I guess they have their purpose. I'm not saying that they're bad, but very little out there is really talking to pastors in terms of the things they go through. So what do you do when somebody stabs you in the back? Now that's something I want to talk about. What happens when your family is falling apart? These are the kind of vulnerable, to your point, issues that oftentimes pastors are afraid to talk about. They're thinking of other pastors as competitors, and that's we've heard that 1,000 times. But the kind of concept is if I'm vulnerable, the other pastors are going to kind of see that, and they're going to be talking about me after the meeting is over. And there's that fear. But if you don't take the chance, relationship doesn't happen. And I've been blessed. Like I said, I'm part of a group of pastors in this region that get together every week. And they get together for prayer. More often than not, they get together for laughing. And they've helped each other. They've ministered to each other. They watch each other's backs. Some cases, they've actually been instrumental in getting facilities for other pastors and doing things that you wouldn't even imagine could happen. But when pastors really start to think of each other as a community, what a difference. And it is amazing. And as we were talking about offline, is so many pastors, again, you even talk about this and it's like, let's stop talking. I don't want, and they're threatened by that.
Yeah.
And you just pray for them because, I came from as I mentioned earlier, I came from a spiritually abusive situation. We believed we were the church. We didn't need anybody else. So I get it on the other side. I probably have more patience because of that, but it's really a challenge in today's church for pastors just to be friends.
Yeah, and I would say to encourage folks, you take the first small step. Don't expect all of this to happen at once. This will happen incrementally usually. I mean, the Lord can certainly, kick a door open and a relationship starts in a very fast way. But most friendships that you and I have over the years happened a little bit at a time. And so that's why intentional is so important. You take the first step and then you take the one after that. And it isn't just the first meeting, it's the second meeting. And in my friendships, particularly in the time of COVID, my friendships don't stay close and vibrant spontaneously. I've got to reach out. I've got to wait. I haven't talked to so-and-so. We have to do this. And so I would say you take that first small step. You don't put too much weight on it and go, wow, that didn't go. It's okay. But then you take the one after that and then the one after that. And you keep praying your socks off the whole way because this was God's plan. You can do this knowing that God does not want you to do this alone. He does not want you to do this alone. When you look at the Apostle Paul, he did not do this alone. Greatest church planter in history. He did not do this alone. And you even see the ache that he has for relationship in some of those prison epistles when he would, try to catch up with somebody and please, you could just hear it in his words. So I just don't want anyone to feel like they have to do this alone. And some of our stuff, some of our materials, some of the things that we're trying to encourage people, hopefully gives them some ways, maybe a safe way to say, hey, we'll do this together, or what do you think of this, or let's go through this together. And it starts a conversation, and then you can go a little bit further.
Perfect. Well, Greg, I want to really thank you for being a part of the podcast today. And
sure.
In a few moments, just going to share some of the ways that you can contact his ministry, get involved with his books, and connect. That's what this is all about. So thank you once again for being a part of this.
It's just a privilege, and God bless you and all of your viewers, because you're not crazy for caring this much and for working this hard.
I can't necessarily prove that. But.
I'm just telling you, the kingdom is advancing and God's up to something. I actually believe that. I really do.
Amen.
Thank you.
Once again, I really want to thank Greg for being a guest today and sharing with us about the culture of the church. I'll have a link in the show notes page at ministerstoolbox.com so you can connect with Greg and the many resources that he offers to local pastors. Before we go, as you know, I always end each podcast with a quote, especially for you. And this one is from an unexpected source, Pat Buchanan, who said, "When the faith dies, the culture it produced begins to die. Then the civilization goes, and then the population. I found this quote powerful because it really underscores how culture in the church is something that's designed to last longer than our ministry. Consider that. Until next time. Hey, before you go, can you please leave me a comment, like, and subscribe? I would greatly appreciate it.